This episode of Creep Street Podcast is brought to you by Martini Coffee Roasters. Martini Coffee Roasters is not a martini-flavored coffee. In fact, it is a family-owned and operated company run by the Martini family. And while I'm sure they enjoy a good cocktail, they are all about that high-quality, smooth, flavorful coffee. Unlike many other roasters, Martini Coffee Roasters roast manually using a traditional method of roasting, most relying on sight and sound to ensure the best results, okay? This is quality, people. This is artisanal. This is handmade. This is what you're wanting. And not only that, but they also sell green coffee beans for those home roasters out there. So please support small businesses and check out Martini Coffee Roasters at martinicoffee.com. Once again, check out Martini Coffee Roasters at martinicoffee.com.
You've taken a wrong turn down Creep Street.
Citizens of the Milky Way, my name is Dylan Hackworth.
I'm Maureen Bogey.
And this is Creep Street. Real quick up top, of course, follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Creep Street Podcast, Twitter on Creep Street Pod, on our Facebook. There is a subgroup. It's called Citizens of the Milky Way, a Creep Street fan page. Anyone is welcome to join that. You just click the join thing and one of us will let you in. But it's a little place where we like to, at least once a day, post creepy or funny stories or memes or you guys, the listeners, will post things you like and we'll
The squad just kind of, pops off and we're just having a good time.
It's a great way to get to know each other and everything. And also, of course, we have a Patreon, where you can get all sorts of monthly goodies from yours truly, the two of us.
We're talking bonus content.
Bonus content, baby.
Ever heard of it?
And in fact, let me read to you the sweet, sweet angelic names sitting at our top tier.
Please.
Of course, the Dream, James Watkins. The Finnish Face via a Lungfist. The Madman, Marcus Hall. The Vivacious Vicky McHugh. The Tenacious Teresa Hackworth. The Heartbreak Kid, Chris Hackworth. The oh-so-suave Sean Richardson. The British Bonebreaker, Bex Martin. The Notorious Nicholas Barker. The Terrifying Taylor Lashmet. The Count of Cool, Cameron Corliss. And the Archduke of Attitude, Adam Archer. Yes. That's right. If you want to hear your name uttered by these two pairs of golden lips, then just head on over to patreon.com/Creep Street Podcast. But you know what?
Woo.
Enough yakking.
Let's get to tacking.
We're headed to the wild, frozen north.
Woo. It's getting chilly, baby. It is a snowy, cold, freaking time here in the United States of America.
No, and in places you wouldn't expect it to be.
Yes.
Obviously.
Right. Here where we are, it's kind of expected.
Yes.
It's kind of, a crazy time. But
obviously, people in Texas getting hit hard and everything, and,
we're sending our
love and
to
stuff, and I know we got some listeners down there, and obviously everywhere else, because everywhere, like my family down in Arkansas and Louisiana have snow, for God's sake. They were out sledding.
I know, it's insane.
Yeah.
It's crazy. But since it's been like this here, it made me think, hold on, something is in the air, maybe literally. And let's talk about what this cold, dark, long winter can mean. And if it's not winter where you live right now, or if you're listening to this another time, it doesn't matter. You listen to it anytime. But
right.
It's just extra points if you're listening to it and you're cold and upset. We're talking about the Wendigo. An incredible, I guess we would say cryptid. Maybe.
I would say so, but you're
not
right.
Really cryptid, more demon, but we'll realize that these Wendigos very much have a human origin to them. So demon isn't really quite the right word. A spooky, scary warning.
Yeah, and that was when I was first getting into all this stuff. The Wendigo in my brain was purely cryptid, but the more you were studying it and I was picking up the peripheral, it's there's a lot more to it than that.
Yeah, absolutely. The Wendigo is a spooky, scary warning coming from Native American legends and backgrounds. And the story of the Wendigo comes from the Algonquian language family, which is one of the largest native linguistic groups in North America.
Wow.
So they're really all in the northern woods area. So this is kind of in Canada and the U.S.
Right.
So northern woods area in the Great Lakes region and the East Coast region. That's kind of the general area.
Right. What's so funny is the majority, like if the Wendigo had a turf,
right,
it would mostly be like Canada area, but
Yes.
it does reach down to this area, Chicago, as cold as it can get. This is where like the Wendigo would go. This is like his Florida.
Exactly. We're the vacation home.
Right.
We're still in their zone.
Right.
But we're down south for them.
Right. This is his Arizona, his Florida. This is his getaway spot.
Yeah, he kind of lets loose here.
Yeah.
So then that's another reason why I wanted to talk about it too. I was like, once I started doing the just kind of curiosity, just general research.
Right.
And then I saw we're kind of in Wendigo country here.
Yeah.
And I thought, oh my gosh, even better.
Even better. Yeah.
As I said, it originated in the Algonquian language family. And some of the tribes within the Algonquian language family are the Blackfoot, Cheyenne, Ojibwe, Cree, and Shinnecock tribes. Now, the ending here of the Shinnecock tribe, I want to circle back to that.
Didn't we talk about them once before?
Because they came up in Amityville Horror.
Amityville, that's
Horror
right,
episode.
because there was a rumor that actually wasn't true, that this
Yes.
house was built on Shinnecock, like a Shinnecock burial ground, which actually was horseshit.
Right.
But that's where that name is ringing a bell. That's
Exactly.
Where it's ringing a bell. Okay.
And so just keep that kind of maybe in the back of your mind. We'll circle back to that
Very
just for
cool.
kind of
Okay.
my own thoughts and feelings on things. So as we said before, all of these places, they share a very similar environment where the winters are long. They can be very harsh, and especially back before electricity and
yeah.
heat and, and ample food supply.
Right.
This could really,
convenience.
right, exactly. Winter was truly a very, very dangerous, scary time.
Right.
Now that we've done our overview, I want to dive in. But I forgot to list my sources as I always do,
go
so
right
I'm going to
ahead.
do it right now, okay? So I had 3 main sources that I worked with this week. Of course, a bunch of other little articles, little YouTube videos. Really, there's great stuff about Wendigo out there. I recommend checking it out.
It's become a recent, a popular. I mean,
Yes.
obviously this legend has been around
For years and years,
You're-
hundreds of years, but yes.
But like it's recently kind of getting its spotlight a bit. I feel.
Exactly. Yes, it definitely is. One is a YouTube video called Wendigo, the flesh-eating monster of Native American legend, and this is part of the Monstrum series by Dr. Emily Zarka.
Yeah.
It's a very interesting and fun series just about different monsters and creatures from all around the world.
Her
Very
videos
exciting.
are cool.
Oh, they're so
very
cool.
cool.
They're part of PBS.
Yeah, that's right. It's like a PBS thing. Yeah, they're very cool. They're super fun, informative, and they're not like if you got like kids or something, they're not
too, intense to have around.
right.
Yeah.
They're very informative without being too free. Yeah, very cool stuff.
Another one of my sources was an article called Stolen Spirits, The Appropriation of the Wendigo Spirit in Horror Literature by Callie Hunchman from one of the funniest universities in the world, Ball State University. We love to hear it. And my final source is the Milwaukee Public Museum. Specifically on their website, they have an oral traditions page.
Oh, very cool.
Recommend you check that out. They have a lot of great stories, oral traditions, which they, wrote down because of the internet.
It's the thing about oral.
Sometimes you got to write it down because
I mean, we all love oral, but sometimes you got to get it on paper.
Absolutely. And that's just journalism 101.
Right.
Is a lot of oral. The following is a quote by Basil Johnston, who is an Ojibwe teacher and scholar based in Ontario, Canada.
The Wendigo was gaunt, to the point of emaciation, its desiccated skin pulled tautly over its bones, with its bones pushing out against its skin, its complexion, the ash gray of death, and its eyes pushed back deep into their sockets. The Wendigo looked like a gaunt skeleton, recently disinterred from the grave. What lips it had were tattered and bloody. Its body was unclean, suffering from suppurations of the flesh, giving off a strange and eerie odor of decay and decomposition, of death and corruption. Basil Johnson.
So the Wendigo can represent 3 main things. 1, the incarnation of winter.
Okay.
The embodiment of hunger, and the personification of selfishness. So the idea with the Wendigo, which By the way, the sources that I read mainly would spell Wendigo Windigo, but most of the time, Wendigo is just most of the time that you see Wendigo written, it's Wendigo. And because the Wendigo was an oral tradition, and because the story of the Wendigo covered such a vast area of North America, there are many different pronunciations and different words for Wendigo. So, for example, I believe there are at least 37 versions of the spelling of Wendigo that just start with W.
Right.
So the spelling, there isn't really a clear cut, this is definitely the way, this is not the way.
So apologies if the spelling we use isn't the one you know. It's not that we think ours was right or yours is right. There's just so many, we're just making do with what we got.
Exactly. All Wendigo live in areas that have these very harsh, long winters, but the reason why they exist is not because they are some animal or some monster that just lives out in the wilderness and is this thing that just attacks vulnerable people.
Right. Which was my initial misconception, which I'm sure until you started was I just thought it was sort of like an abominable snowman or a Bigfoot, like this creature that we haven't been able to confirm. That I didn't realize it had all these other properties to it.
Even though the Wendigo, I mean, it is a monster in a way, it has razor sharp teeth, claws, all of these things I'll describe more later.
Right.
But Wendigo almost always were originally a person. And the idea of a Wendigo is that a person would become a Wendigo because of two main things. One is either they were being selfish and putting the needs of themselves ahead of the needs of the group. And another, kind of essentially the same thing, but just turned up to 11, is cannibalism. And those are kind of the main, general ways one becomes a Wendigo. Because the winter could be so unrelenting and could be so harsh, back in the day, you really had to work together as a community to make sure that the whole group would be able to survive. In some ways, the Wendigo was kind of a warning to people to just kind of really reiterate how important it is that everyone work together. Because if you put your own needs above anyone else, not only is that not the right thing to do, but it can fuck you up and make you into this really nasty monster.
Right.
And the other side of that is cannibalism. Mainly what that is, it's not necessarily saying like, oh, this person had this need for human flesh and that's what made them become a cannibal and that's what's so wrong with them. It's more so like you are put in a position where you feel like you need to eat another person in order to survive. So it's almost like more of kind of a punishment that you would become a Wendigo for doing this. Like it's just another level to make sure that you are prepared for the winter and that you have everything that you need to do in line. It kind of really reminds me of Gryla and the Yule Lads.
Yeah.
That's what it's really a similar idea where it's this story where, it's a little bit different in Gryla and the Yule Lads with the Yule Cat coming down. Like that was more so of like a story.
Right. Well, and plus, because I was actually just thinking that too.
Yeah.
And kind of the big difference is like with Gryla or Krampus or whatever.
Yeah, Krampus too, yeah.
You just end up dead. Whereas with the Wendigo, you not only killed, you also then become that.
Right.
Where, you know what I mean? Whereas like with Gryla and them, it just ended with you being fucking dead.
Right, exactly. And with the Wendigo, you don't necessarily die. It's that
point.
You just become this monster. It's interesting too because once you become a Wendigo, Wendigos have no gender.
Okay.
So no matter what gender you are, when you become a Wendigo, you have no gender at all.
Wow, that's fascinating. Okay.
Yeah, so it's like, but what's also scary with it is that's not the only type of Wendigo necessarily.
Okay.
So as we said, there are a couple of ways to become a Wendigo, but they're all kind of similar. Basically, letting greed and your self-interests get ahead, engaging in cannibalism. But something that is interesting about becoming a Wendigo is that it seems like it is very gradual.
And this is also news to me. I thought it was something more akin to like a werewolf where you had to get like bitten by to become. So you can become, if you're just bad enough with your greed or something, so you can you don't need another Wendigo to come in and make you one, essentially.
Right,
okay.
Exactly. And it kind of reminds me of skinwalkers in that way too.
Right.
Except skinwalkers are more so have a connotation with like witchcraft.
Right.
Whereas that's not the case, at least that I have not found with Wendigo. But yeah, where it's more so because of something that you have done or something kind of spiritual imbalance that you have within you that makes this happen.
Okay.
And in some way, sometimes you hear that because of the way that you're feeling or what you're doing, you become a Wendigo. Some people kind of liken it more to being possessed.
Okay.
Like the Wendigo is possessing you. I don't know if it's like kind of like they're tempting you.
Okay.
Or if maybe you already had these things or these thoughts or these tendencies and the Wendigo is just amping it up. I'm not exactly sure.
Now, can you say you're a good person who's just happens to be out in the wrong place? Can you get killed by a Wendigo? Like, do they attack? Like, if you're say you're an innocent hunter or someone out in the woods,
Yes.
Can you get attacked, become a victim?
Yes, you can. Yeah. Wendigos feed on human flesh. And even though they are ravenous and are constantly eating and cannot get enough food, they always look emaciated.
Okay.
So yeah, they definitely will. And that's another thing, once again, about keeping you with the group and not going off on your own. Because if you're off on your own, that's who the Wendigo are going to go after for their meals.
Right. So I'm starting to see the symbolism here. So it's like a metaphor so whether your greed is money or you're just like power hungry. So in a way, that hunger is kind of a metaphor in a way. That hunger for flesh and blood you would have if you were to become a Wendigo is sort of a metaphor for your hunger for worldly possessions or vengeance or whatever it is.
Right, exactly. And kind of like what you said before, when some European people first were hearing about the Wendigo, it kind of is somewhat similar to a werewolf. Mm-hmm. So there was a connection drawn there, but the difference is kind of werewolves. There's kind of a few different things that are different. One is that it's like becoming a werewolf, it's out of your control.
Right.
You just become this werewolf on a full moon and you're not really responsible for what you're doing. Whereas a Wendigo is kind of like the opposite. It's absolutely taking responsibility for everything that you're doing.
Right.
And you don't really transform back and forth between a Wendigo.
Once you're there, you're that.
Right. And kind of like I was saying before, it seems like it is a gradual change so that the people around them might not even notice that this person is transforming into a Wendigo.
Okay.
And they will kind of go after those closest to them and those weakest and most vulnerable around them. I mean, it's such a trope with like family annihilators. You know?
Yeah.
Which basically is like when someone will kill the whole rest of the family.
Right. As the name would imply.
Right. That's what that means if you've never heard that term. But it kind of reminds me of that, where this entity knows to take advantage and hurt those closest to them because they know them and they know what they can do. Right. Maybe that's not even really family annihilators. It's just all murders usually are to people that you know, and they taking advantage of those people around you. Another difference between the Wendigo and the werewolf is Wendigo, it doesn't really have a super strong association with an animal, whereas, a werewolf is a wolf or a dog or whatever. Right. And then the only animal that really is related to Wendigo is an owl. And Wendigo can translate to either owl or cannibal in certain dialects within the Algonquin language family. So yeah, the owl is sometimes associated. I'm not sure exactly if it necessarily can turn into an owl. I don't believe, but they have some sort of, fraternity fraternity. There's some fraternizing going on between them. But, and this might be a surprise to some people, there is no connection between antlers or a stag or a deer or a moose or a ram or anything with the Wendigo.
Where did that iconography come from?
That came from, I believe it was Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark, the movie in the 80s.
Oh.
Because wasn't there a movie version in the 80s?
There might have been. I don't know. I remember loving those. I mean, I remember the more recent movie we saw.
Oh, yeah. I love the more recent one. Oh, my God, it's so good.
And obviously the books when we were kids.
Yeah, it just stuck.
Because even just like looking up like clip art for the episode, everything has the antlers.
Yeah, and that's kind of another idea about the kind of the appropriation of this, that it's like it's turning the Wendigo kind of more so into just this monster that just attacks people,
right.
And whereas the Wendigo does, but it's not this kind of innocent, where the victims are these innocent kind of wrong place, wrong time people. It's more so your actions bring on this. It brings this on to be, in that you can become this. This isn't just some otherly thing. I mean,
like a generic like movie monster.
Right, but it's like it is a human, and it was a human, and there still is a human in there. And I think a good quote to explain all of this that comes from our very fun and exciting, hilarious Ball State article. It reads, "Manifestations of the Wendigo are responses to environmental and cultural stresses, like isolation and starvation in harsh winter environments and outside colonial factors. As a way of explaining and taking control of stresses, Wendigos haunt their local communities by facing them with prevalent issues of isolation, starvation, and selfishness. Separation from the community, either physically or emotionally, is detrimental to both the individual and the community, and Wendigo spirits serve as guardians of the community by protecting and enforcing the cooperative values of the community." Well, there you go. Of course, there was a good amount of Wendigo sightings, and in the late 1800s, early 1900s, with some pretty interesting cases. One especially of a man who is said to have killed and eaten his family, and stating that he was a Wendigo, I believe. It's very, very interesting, and we're not going to go into that, but I'd recommend if you want to look up something called Wendigo psychosis. It is a very interesting idea. It's basically an idea where it's kind of thought of as a mental illness where people feel the need to become a cannibal, but it's not just cannibalism itself. It's kind of messy, and according to some of these sources, it seems like it's not really a real thing. Okay. It's just wild, it's not really a real thing. I think calling it Wendigo psychosis kind of makes it seem like there's something going on and whatever, but I think it's just kind of these one-off times when people pop off and go wild. But there are still sightings here and there of Wendigo, apparently up in Kenora, I believe is how you pronounce it. By the way, so sorry if I mispronounced things throughout this episode, but I believe in Kenora, which is in northern Ontario. Okay. Apparently that is supposed to be kind of the Wendigo area, and it has been apparently Wendigos have been spotted by traders and trackers and trappers for decades. Okay. And some people say that they also have seen a Wendigo up in northern Minnesota as well. Okay. And I mean, these things are terrifying. Just to reiterate what these people say that they are still seeing. They say that they are still seeing what Basil Johnston, one of the First Nation Canadian authors we quoted in this episode, he said that they look like a gaunt skeleton that has a strange and eerie odor of decay, decomposition, of death, and corruption. They have razor-sharp teeth, claws, sometimes are as tall as 15 feet tall. Their lips have been chewed ragged by their own teeth. They are absolutely emaciated, have a frozen heart, and not only that, they're able to run incredibly fast, can travel in snowstorms, and can travel on the tops of trees. Damn. They may be preceded by a foul, dead odor or a sudden snowstorm. A lot of people have seen sudden snowstorms. I don't know.
We've been getting a lot of sudden snowstorms right here in the States. I'll tell you that right now. We're just about been buried alive in Chicago, and I think we got more coming tonight. We're recording this on the 25th, my birthday.
We're recording this on Dylan's birthday. Thank you so much to everyone for the happy birthday
yes,
shout-outs.
thank you so much. I'm getting a lot of sweet. They're still coming in, and that's so sweet, and it's very kind. Thank you so much.
But so these are the things that people still say they see up in Canada, northern Minnesota, and honestly, throughout the Algonquian language family area. And not only this, I mean, think about that. That is a person in there too. That is a person that has to live in this just squalor and be constantly cold and miserable.
Is the person's original self still alive in that Wendigo? Like, is it aware that it's...
That's a good question. I don't really know.
I would assume that, like, whatever sense of self they have is I could be wrong, because sometimes, you hear with possession stories, that the person is able to, it's not just constantly they're in devil mode.
Right.
Actually, it's quite in some cases it seems like they're mostly in their regular mode, and then, this other side. So is it like that? Is it like they're able to...
Yeah, I honestly am not exactly sure. That's a really good question, and I was curious about that too. I don't really know if you completely change or if there is still that little bit inside of you. Spoiler alert, if you haven't seen Get Out, fast forward 15 seconds. Kind of reminds me of that in Get Out, when you are someone else and then someone takes a picture of you or something happens, and then you kind of have that little thing in the back of you
that like remembers like who you are.
It's kind of the way I think of it, I remember what it's called in the movie. It's like being in the sunken place.
Yeah, that's
where
right.
You are aware of what's happening, but you can't quite get there.
Right. Because in the film they used it. It's almost like they're in this abyss, and it's almost like kind of like a movie screen in the distance.
Yeah, I wonder if it's like that. I don't know. I haven't read that in a source, but that is kind of my impression, and I wonder if it's like that. Okay, welcome back for those of you who didn't want a spoiler. By the way, that movie came out a while ago.
Yeah.
So you're lucky that I gave you a spoiler alert, you little freak of the week. Okay. Now, as I said before, the story of the Wendigo is really, at its heart, a oral tradition.
Right.
So on MilwaukeePublicMuseum.com, as I mentioned this before, they have one of these Wendigo oral traditions written down, and I thought it would be great for us to read one of these stories.
Absolutely.
Once again, it's kind of hard, to give credit to a specific person.
Exactly.
But this is from the Milwaukee Public Museum.
All right.
The villagers realized a Wendigo was coming when they saw a kettle swinging back and forth over the fire. No one was brave enough or strong enough to challenge this ice creature. They had sent for a wise old grandmother who lived at the edge of the village. Her little grandchild, hearing the old woman say she was without power to do anything, asked what was wrong. While the people moaned that they would all die, the little girl asked for 2 sticks of peeled sumac as long as her arms. She took these home with her while the frightened villagers huddled together. That night it turned bitterly cold. The child told her grandmother to melt a kettle of tallow over the fire. As the people watched, trees began to crack open and the river froze solid. All of this was caused by the Wendigo, as tall as a white pine tree, coming over the hill. With the sumac stick gripped in each hand, the little girl ran out to meet him. She had 2 dogs which ran ahead of her and killed the Wendigo's dog. But still the Wendigo came on. The little girl got bigger and bigger until when they met, she was as big as the Wendigo himself. With one sumac stick, she knocked him down, and with the other, she crushed his skull. The sticks had turned to copper. After she killed the Wendigo, the little girl swallowed the hot tallow and gradually grew smaller until she was herself again. Everyone rushed over to the Wendigo and began to chop him up. He was made of ice, but in the center, they found the body of a man with his skull crushed in. The people were very thankful and gave the little girl everything she wanted.
Wow.
Damn, so we got an independent woman
That's right.
in the making. Wow.
Very good for her.
Damn. What a cool story.
What a cool story.
And the fact that Wendigos are ice creatures and seem to never be able to get warm and are obsessed with consumption and wanting to be warm, it reminds me of George Lutz.
Okay.
I mean, the way that he maybe was acting so selfishly and always kind of not wanting to go to work and just being obsessed with how cold he was and not really helping out with the kids and not really getting Christmas presents and all this stuff. He was so focused on his own self. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. It just was something that I thought, and not that I'm saying that George Lutz is
Obviously.
a Wendigo. It just was something, a kind of an interesting parallel, especially because in the Amityville Horror book, they mention the Shinnecock tribe and how they had basically this like holding center on the property on Ocean Avenue, which was not true.
Which was not true, obviously.
So I just thought it was interesting. I was like, oh, the Shinnecock, they were a part of this Wendigo tradition, though, that is also associated with the cold and ice and doom.
Absolutely.
So I just thought that was interesting. So that will wrap it up for this episode of Wendigos.
Absolutely.
Thank you guys for listening. If you have more information on Wendigos, or if you have any personal stories or anything like that, please feel free to reach out to us at any time. We love hearing from you. DM us, comment on a photo, email us at creepstreetpodcast@gmail.com. Whatever, we would love to hear from you.
Citizens of the Milky Way, my name is Dylan Hackworth.
I'm Maureen Bogey.
And this is Creep Street. Good night and goodbye.
Goodbye.